I was able to stack up 28,500 points for Damage Hornets during the Hidden Bunker event on Spaceport. Not gonna lie, I went into this round just to explore some strategies and ended up with a higher score than I expected walking out. Now it's likely that if you do this in a better lobby, you can get a lot better score overall, but since there's a lot of requests for a strategy for this specific challenge, I'm uploading this video with the score that I got because I think it's a decent score overall, but I do fully intend to get a better score as the week goes on. I didn't bring anything too heavy for this type of a challenge. Normally I'd bring something like a Jupiter and a bunch of ammo for it, maybe even a second one for backup, but I just brought a Hull Cracker, a Renegade more so for PvP, and then an Osprey to be able to pull the enemies to me from range. I also brought a bunch of Seeker Grenades just as backup for the Hull Cracker in case I ran out of ammo or I wanted to swap to those for whatever reason. Now I'm going to jump forward a little bit into the middle of the match so I can give you a better idea of the spawns overall. And the first part of the game, I was literally just kind of wandering around, seeing where players were and trying to find a position that was opposite of them. Now keep in mind, in this game, I had a very unique situation where there was an entire artillery of people at the launch tower firing off at every enemy in the area. I'm not entirely sure what the intent was there because it was clear they were trying to do the trial, but with all of them being a solo player, it was essentially taking their score and chopping it in half, if not even by way more, because there was like 4 or 5 people up there at one point just all firing at the same enemy. Now keep in mind, my goal was only to target the Hornets here. I didn't want to worry about the other flying arc enemies, I just wanted to focus on the Hornets. So that also means that because the other players were doing the flying arc enemies challenge, I knew there was an advantage for me to try and gatekeep the enemies that were spawning outside of the walls. In case you're not fully aware of what that challenge means, it is these walls around the spaceport border that kind of blocks in all of the major buildings and separates it from the outside area. Eliminating enemies within those walls is what gets you points, and then any other enemies that spawn outside of it, if you eliminate them for that challenge, will not give you points. So I went to the shipping warehouse and I stood on top of it intending to gatekeep the spawns that were just outside of the shipping warehouse. I didn't realize how many spawns were actually right around this area, and it ended up being a way better strategy than I had intended going into it. Once you are on top of the shipping warehouse, the process here is actually really simple. All you want to do is use the Osprey to aggro enemies to you, and then use the Hull Cracker to finish up the damage or do all of the damage to the enemies. Now the reason the Hull Cracker is important for this specific challenge is because for the Hornets challenge, it operates a lot more like a Damage Bombardiers or a Damage Bastions trial, where the damage that you do to the Hornet is relative to the points that you receive for the trials challenge itself. Whereas if you do something like the Damage Wasp trial, the points that you receive are always a flat 88 for a normal raid and 176 flat for a 2x event last season. It didn't matter how you took the Wasp out, you could blow it up in the air, you could clip 2 of its thrusters and let it fall to the ground. No matter which way the Wasp got eliminated, you would get the full amount of points. Same thing applies for pops and for fireballs, but with Hornets, even though it is a smaller arc enemy like those, it actually functions a lot like the larger arc enemies. So the idea behind the Hull Cracker is that it just ensures that you're going to get the full 760 points for each elimination, so long as nobody else does damage to it. If you clip 2 of the Hornet's wings and let it crash to the ground, you create risk that you might not get the full points. If it detonates on impact when it hits the ground, usually you'll get awarded those points. But if it crashes to the ground, it doesn't detonate and just spins in a circle for a while before it ends up blowing up, that's when you start to lose your points. So it is really important to use an explosive or something to ensure that the Hornet gets eliminated before it touches the ground. Now another thing that you can do, especially if you're in a game like the one that I have, where there's a bunch of players trying to do the Flying Arc challenge, is you can preserve your ammo by focusing only on the Hornets and then kiting the other enemies over into the viewpoint of the players that are doing the Flying Arc trial. In my game, these players were really good at shooting at every enemy that came in line of sight from them, so I just tried to protect myself from those enemies that I didn't want to waste ammo on. It was pointless for me to try and focus on other enemies, I only wanted to focus on the Hornets here. There's roughly 4 to 5 different spawn locations right around the shipping warehouse that you can essentially control by being on the roof. But you need to make sure that you focus the priority on getting the enemies shot down that are within line of sight of other players that are doing the other challenges. As an example, one of the spawns more to the north side of the shipping warehouse has the enemies fly in towards the center of the map, towards the launch towers, and you only have about 10 to 15 seconds to clean those enemies up before they become visible to every other player on the map. So it is important when those enemies spawn in that you prioritize them and focus them down before other players can get that score and take those enemies from you. For the spawns that come in outside of the spaceport walls, you can deprioritize those to an extent. Players that are trying to do the inside the spaceport walls challenge will usually not fire at those ones first, but if there's nothing else on the map, they'll generally try and kite them into the spaceport walls so they can receive the points for it. So you can deprioritize those, but keep in mind you also have the best line of sight and best positioning for those enemies as well. So it is a bit of a juggling act when you're up here about which target to focus down at any given time. I only had a single drought during this game, and while I'm not normally a big believer in the fact that if you just eliminate everything, it will cause the game to spawn a lot more things, what I can tell you is there was a single comet that was roaming around on the outside of the spaceport walls, and there was absolutely nothing going on the inside of the spaceport walls. So just out of a sheer lack of boredom and curiosity, I decided to eliminate the comet with my sniper. What blew my mind is that the millisecond after I eliminated the comet, a bunch of different enemies spawned in on the map. So I do firmly believe that if you're not seeing hornets on the map, but there are other enemies that you can focus down, definitely take the time to put some shots on those and to eliminate them, because it can help to produce more hornets and more hornet spawns for you by taking out the other enemies that are just lingering on the map. Outside of that, there isn't a ton more to this challenge. Just pay attention to where the final extraction is and make sure you head there with enough time to get out safely and head back to Speranza. Collect any loot if you haven't already, and watch your score fly up the leaderboard. That's going to be it for me today, y'all. Thanks for watching.